Hello friends, I am Arpit and I'm here with today's analysis. Today is 13th of June and we are going to deal with three very important topics which are in news. First is heat waves not included as a notified disaster in the National Disaster Management Act 2005. According to this law, a disaster is a mishap, a calamity, a catastrophe, or grievous circumstances caused either by natural factors or man-made factors that results into loss of life, damage to property, and the environment. It is beyond the human coping. That is called as a disaster. And there's a list of 12 notified disasters in the NDMA, that is National Disaster Management Act, but heat waves is not one among them. The significance is that since it is not a notified disaster, the states cannot utilize the funds for coping with this disaster as per this law. Next is the Prime Minister to attend the G7 outreach meeting. Is this the first time the Prime Minister is attending a G7 meeting? No, this is the 11th time. Five times since 2014, Mr. Narendra Modi alone has attended G7 meetings. This clearly signifies India's growing stature and role in the Western countries. G7 countries, which comprises of countries like Canada, USA, UK, then France, Germany, Italy, EU, and Japan. Technically speaking, there are eight. EU is also a member, but seven are countries, and the eighth member is EU. India is the second largest emitter of nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas causing global warming. The main source of nitrous oxide emissions is agriculture because we apply a lot of fertilizers, and when these fertilizers are applied, they emit nitrous oxide like greenhouse gases. They stay long in the environment, but not longer than carbon dioxide. Means they can cause global warming for longer periods. They are less as compared to carbon dioxide. That is why the much focus is on carbon dioxide. But the scientists have been warning that this global warming gas, or I would say greenhouse gas, is also increasing. So we need to look into this as well. And then in the end, we will be covering the MCQs. Let's get started with the first topic, that is heat waves not included as a notified disaster under the National Disaster Management Act 2005. Now, first, a brief about this particular act. Disaster Management Act 2005 was introduced in the year 2005, as we can say, but it was introduced in the aftermath of multiple disasters which struck India. 1999 Odisha super cyclone, 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. Then we realized that there is a need to form, a legislation, and according to that legislation, things will happen. The National Disaster Management Authority was established according to this act. The National Disaster Management Fund, the State Disaster Management Fund. These two funds were established according to this act. A dedicated force, a disaster response force, that is the National Disaster Response Force, was created according to this act. And India now is one of those countries in the world which has state of the art disaster response mechanisms all across the world. If there is any major disaster happening anywhere in the world, India becomes one of the first countries to respond, and dispatches material, men, and other logistical support to the people over there. Now, what is disaster as per this law? Disaster is defined as a catastrophe, a mishap, calamity, or grave occurrence arising from natural or man-made causes that results in a substantial loss of life, destruction of property, or damage to the environment. That is a disaster. And one more thing is added, that it is beyond the coping capacity of the community. Means community cannot fix the things after this has happened. What will happen if heat waves are included? See, heat waves are not included as a notified disaster in the National Disaster Management Act. What will happen? Basically, states will be allowed to use their disaster response funds. So there are two funds, as I told you, which have been established under this act: the State Disaster Response Fund and the National Disaster Response Fund. Now, the situation is that any disaster happens, then it is mandated or it is mandatory for the states to utilize the state disaster response funds first. And when they get exhausted, they can go to the National Disaster Response Fund. Where both of these funds can be utilized in case of a notified disaster only. If a disaster is not notified, the states cannot touch these funds. It has to, if it has to do any expenditure, it has to do it or by itself. It is like this. Now, if heat waves gets included as a notified disaster, the states will be allowed to use their disaster response funds to provide compensation and relief and carry out a range of other activities for managing the fallout of a heat wave. Other activities like it can, construct shades, shady areas. It can provide water and other oral suspensions to the people free of cost during the heat wave days. And all these requires expenditure. If any loss of life happens, then compensation can be given, medical attention can be given to the people. All these can be done. Currently, states need to use their own funds for these activities in case of heat waves, and heat waves are increasing year by year. We've seen this year how many heat wave days are there. The intensity of heat waves are rising. Now, the current list of notified disaster, there are 12 categories or 12 disasters which have been, notified in this act. Cyclones, drought, earthquake, fire, flood, tsunami, hailstorm, landslide, avalanche, frost and cold waves, pest attack, and cloudburst. The latest to be included is pest attack in over here. So this is the current list, and we have not we are not seeing heat waves over here, and that is the main issue which we are discussing, that heat waves should be included. Now, when does the DM Act gets invoked? If a disaster happens, as per definition, then the provisions of the DM Act can be invoked. The provisions allow states to draw money from the two funds. As I told you, National Disaster Response Fund, the State Disaster Response Fund. The states first utilize the funds available in the SDRF, means first this will get exhausted, and only if the magnitude of the disaster is unmanageable, then states seek the money from NDR. This is the second step. Now, for instance, in 2023-24, only two states in India, they touched the NDRF. That is Himachal Pradesh. A lot of calamities did happen over there during the rainy season last year. And Sikkim, there was floods in the Teesta River last year. These were the flash floods and all. So these two states only touched the National Disaster Response Fund. Rest managed with SDRF. Where does the money in these funds come from? It is but obvious that the government will be giving it, but in what proportion and in which fund, which government contributes? So first, let us talk about NDRF. There is no category over here. The states are not divided into any category. 100% of the cost or 100% of the funds in the National Disaster Response Fund is contributed by the central government, 0% by the state government. SDRF. So non-special category status states, basically only 11 states in India, as we read the other day, are special category states. Presently, Andhra Pradesh and Bihar are demanding special category status. So non-special category status, 75% of SDRF contribution is done by central government, 25% done by the state government. In case of a special category states, 90% by the central government, 10% by the state government. This different division we read that day also, but that day we read about centrally sponsored scheme. This is the State Disaster Response Fund. When can the money be utilized from these funds? The money can only be utilized if there is a notified disaster, else money cannot be even touched. So money will not be released if a notified disaster is not there. So it is like this. Why heat waves are not added? Basically, when this Disaster Management Act was formulated, so that time, heat related illness and deaths have been common, but at that time it was not viewed as a disaster when the act came into being in 2005. Because heat waves are a common occurrence, no doubt about this fact. Everyone knows by May, June, there will be heat waves, so they take precautions accordingly. So they are a common occurrence during summer and not really an unusual weather event. It is not unusual that it happens suddenly like a cyclone or an earthquake. People very well know that May, June heat waves will happen. But now the difference is the intensity and the length frequency also has increased of heat waves. That is why we are wanting this to be included as notified disaster in the Disaster Management Act. Is there a need to include heat waves? Yes, in the last 15 years. However, both the severity and the frequency of heat waves have increased. One more phenomenon is there that due to increased economic activity, there are more people out in the sun working. Construction workers or auto wale bhaiya, rickshaw wale bhaiya, or multiple other people who are working in the sun due to increased economic activities. The marketing guys, the sales guys who travel by bike or two wheelers. So there are more incidences of people getting heat strokes due to increased economic activity. So due to increased economic activity, there is a far larger number of people who have to remain outdoors for their livelihoods or other reasons, exposing them to the risk of a heat stroke. So definitely, this is also a reason why these heat waves should be included. How many states are vulnerable to heat waves now? There are 23 states out of 28 states which are vulnerable to heat waves. These states, as well as several vulnerable cities, have now prepared heat action plans. What are heat action plans? They created shades, they created, drinking water kiosks or other oral suspensions they are distributing. So all these kind of things, reorganizing the schedules of schools, colleges, and office working hours. These measures require expenditure actually. And since heat waves is not a notified disaster, so by the states cannot touch that fund also for incurring those expenses. So they are doing it basically out of their pocket expenses, we can say, the state governments. Why the central government is not adding it? There are two broad reasons why the central government is not adding heat waves into this list. First is Finance Commission reluctance. Finance Commission is that constitutional body, Article 280, which is responsible for devoluting taxes to the states from the center. So this demand has been there in front of the Finance Commission since the last three times, but the Finance Commission has been reluctant. However, the 15th Finance Commission endorsed an enabling provision of local disasters and said that if local disasters such as lightning or heat waves happen, states can utilize 10%, up to 10% from the SDRF money. This was allowed by the 15th Finance Commission. Now, using this new enabling provision, at least four states, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Odisha, and Kerala, have added heat waves as local disasters. Other states have not added it as local disasters, so they are not able to utilize funds. Practical difficulties is the second reason why the central government is not including heat waves as a notified disaster. Although this is unstated, but the main reason behind the reluctance to add heat waves is the potentially huge financial implications of the move. If a person dies, then a monetary compensation of rupees 4 lakh for every life has to be given because of a disaster. And this is mentioned in the Disaster Management Act. Grievous injuries also have to be compensated. Now, the other reason is the problem in attributing deaths to heat waves. What if heat waves happen and there's already a pre-existing medical condition in a person that gets aggravated and the death is due to that? Then it will become difficult to prove that this is because of heat wave. There will be complications, there will be litigations then in the courts. So, to avoid these kind of complications, heat waves have not been included as a notified disaster by the central government in the Disaster Management Act, although the need now is to include. Next is Prime Minister to attend G7 outreach meeting. Just 4 days after being sworn in for a third term, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will travel to Apulia region of Italy on Thursday to attend the G7 outreach meeting. Whenever it comes G7, it is basically the developed West. Understand it in this way. So, is this invitation for the first time? No, this is the 11th time invitation to the Indian Prime Minister has been extended to attend the G7 outreach meeting. And Narendra Modi has attended this meeting 5 times alone out of these 11 times. This clearly signifies India's growing stature in the Western countries, how the Western countries are wanting to engage with India or wanting India to engage with them. And that is why this invitation has been extended multiple times. And in the last 10 years, you can see 5 times. So, this is what it signifies. Now, is India only invited? This is also a question. No, India is not only invited. India is among the 12 countries which have been invited. The countries are Algeria, Argentina, Brazil, Egypt, Kenya, Mauritania, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, UAE, Turkey, and Tunisia. Most of these, yeah, many of, but almost all of these are from the global south. The Ukrainian president is also expected, and if he comes, then it will be a key, I would say, summit because we will be watching him interact with our prime minister. So all eyes on Zelensky and Modi. That can be stated. Now about G7, the member countries. First of all, I pick up North America continent, Canada, USA. Then I come to Europe, UK, Germany, Italy, France. European Union is also part of it. But European Union will never become the chair and European Union cannot hold any summit of G7. This is clearly stated. But it is a permanent member. And in Asia, if I come, Japan. So these seven countries, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, makes G7. The eighth member is EU, but it is not counted over here like this. Only seven are counted. Now, once this meeting is over, after this meeting, multiple leaders of G7, apart from Joe Biden, they will be traveling to Switzerland. Why? Because there are peace talks scheduled over there in Switzerland with respect to the Russia-Ukraine war. Will the Indian Prime Minister also go to Switzerland? It is not yet declared. It is not yet declared who will represent India in those peace talks, which are scheduled to happen 15th, 14th, 15th or 16th of June or somewhere like this only. We covered this earlier. Now, origin of G7 and its present composition. The origin of G7 lies in the oil shocks of 1973. Now, what were these oil shocks of 1973? If I talk about these, so these oil shocks were given by the Arab Muslim countries. The Arab Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and all, they were showing their solidarity with the Palestinians and they believed that all those countries who supported Israel in the war against the Palestinians and other Arab countries like Egypt and all, they will not be supplying them oil. And who supports Israel? The Western countries do. So this happened. That was called as the oil shocks of 1973 and the corresponding financial crisis. Now, in order to address this situation after oil shocks, the heads of world's six leading industrial nations decided to hold a meeting in 1975. These six nations were USA, UK, France, Germany, West Germany at that time, Japan, and Italy. Now, these countries were joined by Canada in 1976, and hence G7 came into existence in 1976. In 1998, Russia also joined G7 and G7 became G8. But this membership of Russia was not long lived. It was only for 16 years because in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, a peninsula in Ukrainian territory, and as a punishment, Russia was expelled from G8. G8 again became G7. European Union is also represented within the G7. India has never been a part of G7, never a permanent member of G7. It is only getting invited over there. Next is India is the second largest emitter of nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas causing global warming or climate change. This greenhouse gas stays in the environment for long, but not longer than CO2. This nitrous oxide, that is this greenhouse gas, is on the rise. So the scientists have warned that we should also look to tackle this. We should not only focus upon methane or carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the highest, more than 400 parts per million is carbon dioxide, and that is somewhere around 1,000 times or multiple times more than nitrous oxide. But yes, since this is also on the rise, so we should tackle this timely. And in all this, a report has come, and in this report, India has been said that India is the world's second largest source of nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas that heats up the atmosphere far more than carbon dioxide. 11% of such global man-made emissions in 2020 were from India, topped only by China at 16%. So China is at number one position, India at number two position. Here, far more than carbon dioxide means the greenhouse potential or the global warming potential of nitrous oxide is more than carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, no doubt, is in the maximum amount any greenhouse gas is there in the environment, but its potential is less. Potential of nitrous oxide is more. The highest potential is of methane, one of the highest potential, but methane is short lived. Okay. What is the major source of nitrous oxide? The major source of nitrous oxide is fertilizer usage. That is what is it means from the agricultural fields. So we need to understand this. And agricultural production using nitrogen fertilizers such as ammonia, animal manure contributed 74% of the total anthropogenic N2O emissions in the last decade. So this data is published in Earth System Science Data. This is the journal, and according to this journal, only India is the second highest emitter of nitrous oxide. Now we enter the MCQs. First is, which of the following is our notified disasters? Very simple it is. Tsunami, cyclones, heat waves, or lightning. You have to find the correct combination. Second, consider the statements and mark the correct one. Whenever notified disaster occurs, the states can utilize funds from National Disaster Response Force. The funds from State Disaster Response Fund can be utilized for a non-notified disaster also. Very carefully see which is correct. There is a lot of play of words over here in this question. Third is, the G7 outreach meeting 2024 is being held in which city? Very direct question. UPSC very rarely can ask this question, but yes, just to check your factual knowledge, I have included this. Fourth is, consider the statements and mark the correct one. G7 was formed in the aftermath of oil shocks of the 1970s. Russia was a founding member of G7. Which among these statements is are correct? And last is, consider the statements and mark the correct one. Nitrous oxide's main source of emission is agriculture. Nitrous oxide can stay longer in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide and cause global warming. Which among these statements is are correct? And with this, we come to an end of today's session. I will be meeting you tomorrow now with more such informative news pieces. Till then, you guys very well know what to do. Keep studying, keep reading, keep writing, and most importantly, keep revising. Namaste. Jai Hind.